Katie Pickler, and with me today is my co-host. He's automatic, he's systematic, hydromatic. Why, it's Cort wins it!
Grease lightning!
Start your engines, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a fun episode ahead.
We're talking about cars. There's the opening bell. So, as is the case with so many of our podcast topics, we really thought that this was going to be a simple, short, sweet episode about car loans. We were just going to knock it out real quick. And then we started researching it and started trying to figure out what we wanted to actually tell y'all about. And we realized that this is it's a lot more stuff than we really initially thought. So we're breaking it into 2 episodes. This first episode, we're going to talk about why are you getting a car? Do you really need a car? What are you going to be using it for? Who's going to be driving it? How long are you going to keep it? We're going to go through the entire decision-making process of actually choosing to get a car. You know, how do you decide whether you actually need one? We're going to go through all of those steps in this episode. And then ultimately, in the next episode, we will talk about debt, because we're still in our debt series. We're going to talk about the actual car loan. So...
Sounds exciting.
You sound excited, Katie. So, I mean, this one, it seems kind of like an obvious, a gimme, really. What are we going to talk about if we're going to do a top 5 today?
Well, I mean, of course, we're going to talk about our dream cars, but really, okay, dream cars are out there, those super expensive that the elites of the elites have. Let's make it fun.
Okay.
Let's talk about those cars that are in those TV shows, those movies, those cars that we are watching the movie and we're mesmerized. Like, yeah, I can see myself driving that car.
Okay, so our top 5 this week is top 5 best cars in pop culture.
Yes.
Katie, it's your turn.
Okay, going in reverse order. I mean, this was a tough one.
Oh, I mean, listen, can I just say, I thought this was going to be easy. I was kind of like, well, this seems kind of like a lame topic. There are hundreds of cars that I want to have in my list, and narrowing it down to 5 is ridiculously hard.
Oh, it's impossible. Yeah, because you could do a whole genre of like your fast cars, your fun cars, your whatever it may be car. But
jump in. Let's go.
Both
feet. Let's go.
Okay, my number 5 is going to be Breathless Mahoney. That's the name of the car, and it is from Dick Tracy.
Nice.
This was Madonna's car. It's a 1936 Auburn Boattail Speedster. It's just, I mean, that movie in itself was so fun with all the bright colors and all of that. And this car just was amazing. Of course, Madonna it fit her perfectly.
I can't argue.
Okay, my number 4 would be Blues Brothers. Their 1974 Dodge Monaco with the humongous, what was it, the big speaker thing on top of it? I mean, come on. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh yeah. It was a great car. It was really, honestly, it looked like a pile of garbage, but it was a great car for that movie.
It's iconic. You saw
awesome.
that, and instantly you got the theme song playing in your head. You're putting on your sunglasses. Yeah, perfect. All right, number 3. So this, used to be my number 1, but now it's bumped down. Eleanor. 1967 Mustang Shelby GT 500.
You've been talking about Eleanor for like a week now.
Not Fast and the Furious. Sorry, Gone in 60 Seconds.
Yeah, I know what it's from, and you have repeatedly said that it was the car.
That would be the car that I would love to have and own and drive, and I would love it. Of course, I'd have to hire a mechanic to be with me at all times when it would break. But
well, yeah,
whatever.
Eleanor was a little testy, wasn't she?
Yes, Eleanor was, but just so beautiful.
Okay,
number 2. This is from the movie Suicide Squads. Mm-hmm. It is actually the Joker's car. It is called the Vador. And it is a custom car. It's not anything that you can go and look at, although after looking at articles, people have commissioned to have this made. But I say it's pink. The articles say that it's purple.
It is purple.
It's one of those shades.
Well, I'll go get one of my Batman comics and I'll pull it out and I'll show you a picture of the Joker in his classic Joker, Tails coat. Okay. And it's purple. And the coat is purple. Everybody says it's purple. Everybody agrees it's purple. You tear a little piece of that coat off. Not that I would ever tear a piece out of one of my comic books. You hold it up next to that car. It's the same shade.
Well, in this movie, Harley Quinn, was in the car, so I liked it better because it looked like it was her perfect car, not the Joker's.
Okay.
Okay, my top one, my favorite, would have to be from a really sweet little old show called The Munsters.
Oh, wow.
Yes, it's The Munsters Coach. I mean, how awesome is that?
I do love that car.
They paid $200 to have this car built. Yes, it was actually made from 3 Model T bodies, and it was 18 feet long, but it had a V8 in it.
Oh, listen, you're not getting any argument from me. I love the Munsters car. I just can't believe that Eleanor fell down 2 spots. 2 spots. You're a fickle car lover.
Oh, well, that's why I hadn't bought any. I haven't made the investment yet because I have not made the firm decision. But that's my 5. I want to hear yours.
Well, here comes my 5, Katie. Ready? Number 5. We're going with the 1976 Ford Gran Torino, driven by Starsky and Hutch. I don't know why, probably because of my age, but this car is stuck in my head forever because the show was on when I was a kid, and I loved that car. I just loved it, and I love it to this day. Number 4, I'm going to go with Christine. It was a 1958 Plymouth Fury. And I loved the Stephen King book, Christine. I also loved the movie, Christine. And everything about that car is forever. I'm going to say something highly controversial right now. If you gave me the choice between a 57 Chevy and a 58 Plymouth Fury, I would take the 58 Plymouth Fury. Why? Because it's a killing machine. That's right. Christine. Check it out if you haven't seen it. Okay, number 3. Oh, here's where we get into basically a tie for number 1. And so I really just, off the top of my head, depending on my mood, is where these are going to land. But today...
Oh, see, you're allowed to have by your mood, but I can't.
Well, I mean, nobody's going to argue with any of these being the baddest cars ever, basically. So...
Okay. Continue.
Today, number 3 is Kit from Knight Rider. It is, the car talks. The car has a fantastic computer. It could drive itself. It could do this all back in the 80s. It was bulletproof. It was basically the baddest car ever. So the Knight Industries 2000 from Knight Rider. It was, if you were wondering, it was actually a 1984 Pontiac Trans Am. But, the important thing, it was Kit. So that's my number 3. Number 2. Oh, man, see, it's still hard. Number 2 is the Tumbler. Oh,
I almost had that on mine.
Yeah, it's from Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. I will accept no arguments on this. It's just cool. And
it's like
number
a souped
1,
up Lamborghini.
Yeah, well, it's like a Lamborghinized tank is what it is.
Yeah.
And yes, that is a new word. You can put it in the book. And then finally, number 1. Today, number 1 is going to the DeLorean. Do I really need to say more? No. I will. I'll say more. The DeLorean is from Back to the Future. It was a 1981 DeLorean DMC-12. It's iconic. Everybody knows what you're talking about when you're talking about the DeLorean. And the reason that it's going in my number 1 spot is because it's also a time machine. And man, do I want to travel through time. Huge history buff. Want to go back and check out a whole bunch of things that have happened in the past. And maybe change a few things. So that's my top 5. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, I know, I didn't know leading into this, but I know now that there are hundreds of cars that could have made it into our lists. And,
absolutely.
So we obviously couldn't list them all. There are some big honorable mentions that we should probably throw out there just so we don't get a lot of hate mail.
I know when you're talking about the one that could, be a part of you and was... I guess Kit. I was thinking of Bumblebee the whole time. Like, Bumblebee should have been on there. It can transform.
Well, yeah, but which Bumblebee? Are you talking like comic book Bumblebee, Bumblebee the movie Bumblebee, or Transformers Bumblebee? Because you got the Volkswagen Beetle Bumblebee, or you got the Camaro. Which is it?
The Camaro, of course.
Well, see, I would take either one of them. Which brings us to another Beetle, the Love Bug.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
Herbie.
Yeah. Some people would be yelling at us if we left Herbie out. I mentioned one Trans Am with Kit. There's also the Trans Am, the classic Trans Am from Smokey and the Bandit.
You got Grease Lightning.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I can't even believe it. We even threw out some Grease Lightning in the opening.
Yep, and then General Lee. There's so many great cars out there. But okay, let's talk about cars. Let's talk about car debt. Want to put up front that we're going to be talking about looking at cars and looking at what you want to buy and kind of all the different elements of it. But know that this is going to be for more your main transportation. This is not going to be about those that are ultimate car collectors and wanting to have, 10, 12 cars that are all these exotic things. That's a horse of a different color. That's a whole nother podcast where we talk about collectibles and the investment of that.
We're not doing cars as an investment. We're not doing cars as collectible. We're doing cars as an expense, cars as a living expense, cars as a necessity in this episode. And more than that, this is part of our debt series. So we're doing not just cars, but we're doing car loans. We're doing how are you going to pay for this? And we want to cover that as well, for sure.
Yeah, so the first thing we got to talk about is transportation as a whole. Depending on where you live.
Do you need a car?
Yeah, do you need a car? What are your options? Are you in a city where it's a lot of public transportation? Is it something that you have one car and you share within a family? Right now, the big thing is Uber and Lyft and, ride share programs. Of course, then we've got crazy times right now with pandemics that make it where those are public transportation and sharing are not the best option, and you want your own car.
Ride sharing can be a little scary. Buses and subways can be even scarier. Yeah, absolutely.
But so think about it of before you even get to the point of, yes, of course, we all want to drive a DeLorean or an Eleanor or whatever it is, but you got to do your research before you even step foot in that dealership, and you got to figure out, what is a car? What does that mean? Is it something that really gets your family to where they need to go? Is it what you need for your job? Is it holding your precious cargo of your family? What is the value of this car to you?
Yeah, I mean, and not only that, but there are things that you have to consider based on what your current life is like, where you live and so forth. That will affect the cost of the car. Because when you consider the cost of the car, you don't just consider how much does the car cost me? Like, what is the sticker price of the car? But you have to take into consideration everything else that goes with owning a car. One of the things that you have to consider is, I live in New York. I have access daily to a subway. I really, really want a car, but I don't need one to get to work, and I don't really need one to be a productive human being. So if I'm getting a car, it's because I'm traveling. Maybe I work in New York, but I live out in the suburbs or out in Connecticut or out in New Jersey or something like that, and I want to drive in every day. Even then, you still might be able to get a train. How much is parking going to cost you?
Oh, yeah. Parking alone in some places are just crazy. And if you've paid this sticker price for a car, $50,000, $60,000 for it, but then you're having to pay $1,000 a month in parking just for a car to sit.
Yeah, so
I saw something that was like 95% of the time your car is sitting parked. I mean, that's crazy.
It doesn't, for me, at my personal income level, if I were living in a place like New York City, I would sell every car that I own currently and just be commuting to work by foot or by subway. I would not own a car. I don't need to pay for parking. Honestly, I don't need to drive in New York City, if I'm being completely honest. But.
Well, but it's across the board with a lot of these topics we talk about. It's not just taking the singular thing of, I want a car or whatever it is you want to do. You have to look at your whole picture.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times we hear the joke of the bachelor that's driving a little 2-seater car, and then he gets a family and has to get rid of the 2-seater car.
9 months. Do you remember that movie?
Yeah.
With Hugh Grant?
Hugh Grant.
Yeah, he had the Porsche, and he had to
get rid of it.
At the end, he got rid of it and got a Ford Explorer, I think.
Yeah. So, I mean, you hear that a lot because your life changes and you've got to adapt to what you need. That's what we want to break down, is figuring out that it is not just the sticker price. It is your safety. It is your transportation to get you to and from a job. It's to go visit loved ones. So it's more than just the value of how much you're actually paying, but it's also the flip side. If you're paying for a cheap car and it keeps breaking, it's not reliable. That ends up costing you more money. Or at what cost are you willing to, or lack of cost for a car, but you're going to put your family in something that's not reliable. And then that's the risk right there.
Yeah, absolutely. So safety is definitely an issue. You've also got, you kind of mentioned the whole cheap car angle, but also even with an expensive, really, really great car, you're still paying for regular maintenance for that car. No matter what kind of car you get, you're going to be paying for maintenance for that car.
I mean, Cort knows for sure, and our invisible man that you never see, Cam, knows this for sure, that I hate getting gas. I absolutely hate it. I don't know why in 2020 we have not figured out some way that I can just push a button in my car and it automatically refills with gas.
I think we're close.
So that's something to consider.
It may still have to drive itself to a station, but I'm pretty sure we're almost there.
Yeah. So that's something, just the simplest of it is you've got to consider when you're purchasing a car, it is the gas, it is those oil changes, it's the tune-ups, the tires. What if something goes wrong? The insurance on it.
Yeah, let's take you back to our budgeting episodes early on in this podcast. When we talk about all of these things, okay, this is a good point in this podcast to point out. We are approaching this as though the car is not an investment. It is an expense.
It is a living expense.
But the expense is not just the vehicle itself. Even if you pay for the vehicle up front, you still, even if you pay for the entire price of the vehicle up front, you still have other costs that you have to consider. And if we're being honest, not a lot of people can't pay for the entire vehicle up front. So, but even if you could, you still have gas, you still have insurance, you still have all of these other costs that are going to be monthly costs that you have to budget for. And insurance and gas and maintenance are those things that are going to go into your consideration. So if you do finance it, if you can't pay for the entire thing up front, then you can't just think to yourself, okay, I need a car. I've never had a car before. I have $500 a month in my budget that I can pay towards something. So I'll get a car with a car note of $500 a month. No, you can't do that because just the car note is $500 a month. Then you have nothing left to pay for gas, insurance, maintenance, all of those other things. So you've got to take everything into consideration before you buy the car.
Yep. So there's some questions that we were thinking of before you even get to the point of actually purchasing the car, and we're going to kind of go over them across this entire podcast. So the first one is, what is the purpose of this car? You've decided right now you need a car. So what is the purpose of it? Is it a business vehicle that you're in a manual labor position, so you need a truck and you're going to be lugging product all the time or making deliveries, so it's going to be on the road a lot? Or is it a family car? So that in itself, it's make that decision right there, because that determines a lot. And if it's a business car, then there's a whole other part of that with making sure it's lined with your business and making sure you're taking advantage of all the opportunities out there. If
you're a business executive, you may need a nice sedan that you can drive people to a business dinner in. If you're using this mainly for family, then you may just need a big car that you can carry around a lot of people in. It's probably going to need to be rugged. You're going to be doing, goodness knows what. Obviously, you may need a pickup truck if you work a farm and you need,
I think about FedEx pilots all the time when I see this, because so in Memphis, we have a lot of FedEx pilots here, and they are notorious for, they have crash pads where if they don't live in Memphis and they've got a place they stay. But in addition to that, they have kind of their airport cars. So they may have a nice Suburban or a nice little sports car or whatever it may be at home. But the vehicle that they actually drive to the airport and leave for however long they're gone, how many days, it's a junker.
Just in case.
Yeah, just in case something happens. And because there's no point of them driving their nice new Mercedes or whatever it may be to the airport to sit. They'd rather have that, real cheap little car that has an engine, can get them to and from, and that's all that matters, because it's just them.
So what is the purpose of the car that you are purchasing? When you are determining whether or not you want to buy a car and then how you're going to pay for the car, whether you're going to purchase it outright or lease it, one of the things that you have to consider is, what is the purpose? And that could affect what the purpose of the car is and how long you plan on keeping it. That could affect how you're going to finance it, if you're going to finance it. Are you going to purchase it? Are you going to lease it? I mean, all of these things that we're going to go through.
Yeah. And so the next part, so you're figuring out what the purpose is. Who is the driver? Is it a new kid that just got their license? Is this your aging grandparent who doesn't need to have a big old car but needs to have something safe and reliable? Identify who the driver is and what the whole longevity of this car is. I know a lot of families will switch down and they'll give their car to their kid that just got their license, and then they'll get something new. So just look again at the whole picture of it and what this car, who's going to be driving, who's behind the wheel.
Yeah. You may be purchasing a car that you expect to basically last through the life of your entire family. Every time I buy a car, I expect that it's going to be handed down generation after generation, basically. I mean, that my first car was a hand-me-down car that had been hand-me-down, and so that's kind of my perspective on life. But if you're a person that after 2 years,
you get bored and trade it out.
Yeah, you're going to want to trade that car out. Then is purchasing really the right choice for you? Or if you are going to purchase, is financing out for 60 months really the right choice for you? All of this has to go into consideration. It all plays
into it. And it's also the miles that you're going to put on within a year. Like I know that in normal times, I'm driving all the time. For instance, this past weekend, we had an event here at the office. I drove to Huntsville for a birthday party that lasted 2 hours, and then I drove back. That is craziness. That's a lot of miles. So I am someone who puts a lot of miles on my car, but when I go in to get a new car or, figure out what I'm doing, I put that out there. Oh, I drive a lot, so we need to reference this. Because when we get into talking about buying versus leasing, the miles you put on the car matter. And also researching your cars and making sure you find the ones that can withstand that many miles on a car.
Okay, just as a side thing, if you were going to try and decide between buying and leasing and financing for 3 years versus financing for 6 years, if you really like to trade out cars every 3 years, then you might think to yourself, oh, I'm going to lease because I like to trade out cars every 3 years. But if you are trading out cars every 3 years and you use your car for business, and you're traveling 50,000 miles a year for business in that car, then a lease isn't necessarily the right thing for you because you're putting way too many miles on that leased car. So you might want to finance it, but you might want to finance it for a shorter term. You see how everything is sort of, it all depends. Cort loves it when it all depends.
Yeah. And so the other kind of components that, we're going to go into with the rest of this podcast is making sure you figure out what features are important to you. If it has the third row, if it can store a lot, whatever it may be, but make sure you figure out what's important to what the purpose of this car is. And then ultimately you've got to figure out what are the maintenance costs going to be? How much are those oil changes going to run you? Is it a high maintenance car? Can you handle that? And then it breaks down to, are you doing used versus new? So at the heart of it all is you got to do your research. And the car business, so I married into the car business. My father-in-law has been in the car. Actually, my father-in-law and then his father and then the whole family, pretty much with them combined, have been in the business like 60 years. And then my husband actually got into the business a month after we got married. So I'm learning all about this crazy world of the car business that I didn't know before. And it used to be that, people had one dealership in town. And they would get the actual paper books that were published of the consumer guides. And they would go in there and they'd rattle it off. And at that point, car dealerships had the advantage of there was only like one in town. So they could tell people, well, this is what we've got. If you don't like our prices, then you can drive 50 miles to somewhere else and get one. Well, fast forward to where we are now, it is predominantly internet driven. And it's good and it's bad because there's almost too much information out there now. And that with everything, with every good, there's always going to be a bad. Actually, my father-in-law made a comment and said, every car out there on the market, you will find at least one story where it says that the car drove itself into a swimming pool. When that's not true, but you can find a story almost on every car that it did that. And so I feel the stigma, and I have to say this because it's my family now, but the stigma of the sleazy car salesman, I think, is kind of, for the most part, gone out the window. And these people are more trying to be a partner with someone. They're wanting to have retention. They're wanting to help these people out and help them with the whole story. again, this is, not everybody, but it's some of them.
So, spoiler alert for later in the episode. I think part of what she's saying right here is basically like everything else, finding a salesman or a salesperson that you can trust is a big part of purchasing a car. Having that trust relationship is a big part of purchasing a car.
But we are in a time where there's so much resources out there, and you can look up a car, you could build it out without even having to talk to somebody. And then
I build cars all the time. It's one of my favorite hobbies. I go onto all of the websites and build all of the cars.
But you can sit there and type in, what's the average maintenance for this kind of car? What insurance would I be looking at for this? So it's at your fingertips. And so you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't get all this research before you even walk in the dealership. Or nowadays, you don't even have to actually walk in the dealership. You send a little internet lead out there, and most of the time, dealerships now, it's a real person that will respond to you and call you and just say, hey, let's talk about this car. And I've even seen some deals done where, I don't recommend this, but if you really trust your person, you could buy a car that's, a state over from you. And if it's a great car salesman, they're going to bring it to you and take care of it for you. So there's not that grueling process of having to sit at the dealership. But I don't recommend that for everybody. You've got to have that right partner.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me see. What haven't we covered when we're talking about doing your research? Because you've got to make sure that you understand the idea of what you need the car for, what kind of car you're getting, what are the you can actually ask if you're going to a lot, a new car lot and purchasing a car, you can ask the salesman, hey, how does this car depreciate?
Yep.
What is the value going to be when I drive it off the lot? What is it going to be? And if the salesman is worth his salt, he's going to know. He's going to be able to give you an answer.
Because depreciating value is the biggest thing. And I think that's why a lot of people say, you don't need to have debt on this because it's depreciating asset and all of that. But we've had a little different opinion of it and making it a living expense because most people need that car. But I think it's something like within the first year, your car depreciates 20-30%. Mm-hmm. And then after that, the next, several years, it's going to keep dropping 15-18%. And that's where people get upside down in their cars.
Ooh, jargon violation. Katie, what does upside down mean?
You're turned upside down. No, okay. Upside down in a car does not mean your car is literally flipped over. In theory, it's meaning that you owe more for your car than what it's worth. That is in simplest terms. So
you took out a loan. Yep. You've been making payments. You're not necessarily delinquent.
Yeah.
But if you were to go in and try and sell your car, the actual value of your car now for resale is lower than what you owe for the car.
Yeah, and that becomes a big issue when you get into the trading section. But yeah, we mentioned it before that there are certain people out there that say it's best to pay for a car full out and having no car payments. But really, you do have more car payments coming, except for when you take control of it and you have set up that you're taking out a loan or you're financing a car and you've got set payments, you're in the control position because you know what it's going to be. So in essence, when you pay it in full, then it's one of those you think, oh, okay, I don't have any car payments anymore. Well, you do because you're still paying your gas, you're still paying your maintenance, but you in theory could have a big car payment show up, sprinkle down because a tire blows or a window cracks. So you just don't have control of when something major happens with that car. So how we're looking at it as it's a living expense, you build it into your budget because more than likely you're always going to need a car. And when you pay one off, eventually you're going to have to probably buy another one because cars have gotten so advanced, it's hard to keep them for an extremely long time.
It's almost like an iPhone. You're gonna have to update it eventually because they just keep getting, they're just outstretching technology. It's ridiculous. It's crazy.
And that's when you look at the situations when you're dealing with a maintenance issue and they'll tell you like, okay, I could fix this, but it's almost cheaper for you to just go ahead and trade this in for something for parts and get a new car.
My Atlanta. Okay, so let's recap just real quick, so make sure everybody's still on the same page. Do we need a car? That would be, what is your job? Where do you live? How much do you have to commute every day? If it's a block, you may not need a car. And then if you do need a car, what kind of car are you going to get? That would be used car, new car, what kind of car? All of those things have to be considered. And then how are you going to treat the car? Is it an investment? No, we don't recommend it as an investment unless it's a collectible, which we're not covering in this episode. So we're really talking about cars as an expense. And it's basically how much can you afford, not just for the car, not just for the car up front. Are you going to pay for it up front? Or are you going to finance it? But also for the car maintenances, the gas, the insurance, all of that stuff. Consider all of that. Okay, so right now we're at that point in the talk.
So you can sit there and look at it. There's something called the MSRP price. And that is, you've got your invoice price, which is what the actual dealers pay for the car. And then the MSRP is what the manufacturer is recommending they sell it for. And so I think a lot of people go in and want to try and negotiate and get it down. And it's across the board. Some dealerships, what you learn with car dealerships and all of this is they all kind of have their own governance. They all do their own thing and they all have to follow general guidelines, but every dealership's going to be different. And that's where it's kind of finding those partners that can work with you across the board with any car you want. But you look at it this way, like Coca-Cola, we all pay the, $1 out of the vending machine, $1.50 out of the vending machine. Yeah, that's what you pay. But Coke, it didn't cost Coke $1.50 to make that bottle of Coke.
Right.
So just look at it that way. Some dealers will give discounts, some don't, and that's where it's just doing your research and shopping around.
Well, okay, so that brings us to one of the things that we considered talking about is, top 10 questions you should ask when you go into a dealership, or top 10 questions you should ask if you're buying a used car. And we decided not to include a segment with those questions, but Katie just brought up a good question that you can ask. If you're going into a dealership and looking at purchasing a new car, what are the dealer incentives? What sort of discounts are they offering? If you ask them those things, then they'll let you know, and it may make a difference, because if they have a ton of one type of car in stock but not so many of another car, then they may be really trying to sell this one particular car. It may not be the car that you're looking at. So that's a question to ask. Just what are the incentives? What's out here that you're trying to sell? What are the bargains? What are the deals? Whatever it is.
So something that I didn't know a lot about was the trade-in values. And with dealerships, I think a lot of times we'll see people selling cars on like Facebook and Marketplace and all of that. And, that's one way to do it. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of risk that you're going through for the buyer and the seller. So when you're actually going to a dealership and you're looking at trading in your vehicle in exchange for buying something, dealerships may not give you what the Kelley Blue Book, what it tells you the value of your car. Dealerships may not match that. And it's because they're taking on having to take this on and make sure it's clean and advertise for it and sell it. So essentially you're looking at getting your vehicle. If you give it to a dealer, yes, you may not get as much for it as you would have if you were selling it. But then if you're selling it, think about your time and your resources to sell it. So that's one of the things about trading in a car. And it goes back to the upside down in your car. If, say that you owed $38,000 on a car that you originally took out a loan for $40,000, and you're wanting to buy a $50,000 car, they're going to have to subtract that $38,000 you already owe. You're taxed on the difference plus fees, and then that money is owed back at the end of it. It's a mess. So that's something that you need to research and figure it out. But at the end of the day, car salesmen, they want to make the deal. They want to work with you. And that's where you do your research as much as possible. And then you tell them what's going on. And at any point, if they tell you, oh, I want this for the car, you can walk away from it. Like, oh, no, I can get it better from somebody else. You've got that right. So buying versus leasing, we touched on it a little bit. So leasing, you're renting it. It's paying the cost of the time that you have the car. And then they have to calculate in there with the miles. So like someone like me does not need to lease. I put way too many miles on a car.
I drive a lot. I've always heard that you shouldn't lease a car, but I think it's not necessarily that you shouldn't lease a car. You just shouldn't lease a car if you have 3 children in college and are driving all over the country all of the time, because then there's so many miles.
Well, and so leasing apparently used to, not a lot of people did it because it seemed like there was a lot of parameters around it. And now it's actually becoming a little bit more popular. Manufacturers are getting behind it and helping with the cost of it and really making it work out for those that like to trade their cars in every couple of years. It is perfect for them. Now, again, it's the whole picture of it of, do you like to trade your cars in every couple of years? But if you are a terrible driver that goes off-roading and drives, 50,000 miles in a year, you're not necessarily the candidate just because you like to trade your cars in every 3 years.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing that I heard one time was a stat, and it was from a secondary source. I can't cite the stat or anything like that, so I can't tell you where I heard it. But I heard from someone that it was never more expensive to maintain an old car than it was to buy a new car. And I'm not sure if that's still true. Do you know? I have no idea.
I have no idea.
I think that it is way more common now, where it used to be always cheaper to maintain a car, even if it was just breaking down all the time. I think it's way more common now that there are these ways that you can purchase a new car or lease a new car that sort of, if you've got a car that is 15 years old and has 300,000 miles on it, and you're basically replacing parts every single month, it might behoove you to actually, trade up to a new car.
And it's not reliable if you're constantly worrying that it's going to break. Yeah. And the car dealerships now, they're attracted towards the leasing because there's a loyalty rate. Like, car dealerships now want retention. They want returning customers. They want to make people happy. So they've seen that crazy, 65% of people, they have a higher retention rate with those that have a short-term lease with them, 36-month lease with them, versus those that have purchased 72 months financing. Because at the end of that, what's going on when you've had your car for 72 months? More than likely, you're starting to have to, maybe something's going wrong. Maybe something's breaking. So you're not exactly happy with Lexus as you were 72 months ago when you bought it, or even, 36 months ago. So that's where they're kind of changing things up a little bit. Because let's be honest, these cars are computers now.
So let me just jump in there. We're talking about questions that you could ask. One of the other interesting questions that I read online when I was researching this episode was in terms of a car that you bought new, you may not be happy with 3 years from now. One of the things that somebody recommended online was ask the dealer if they have something like the car you're thinking about purchasing, but 3 years older, that's on their lot.
Oh, yeah.
And ask to test drive that 3-year-old version and see how it drives. Now, you may not get a good car-to-car exact comparison, but, it was an interesting thing that I had never considered was like, hey, do you have something 3 years old like this that I can drive and see how it drives? Because that'll give you an idea of whether you'll like it 3 years down the road or 72 months down the road or whatever.
Yeah, obviously it's not the car term, but the shelf life of the car. How long is it going to last? And, what's the resale value? And
there are going to be rattles. There are going to be little latches that don't latch anymore or switches that don't work. So are they going to be things that you can put up with? But good question to ask.
Is the heart of it, is the transmission, the engine, all of that, is that still going to be kicking?
Is that good? Can you put up with what's not good?
Yeah.
Okay, so listen, we've got 4 steps in basically
4-step program.
Yeah, it's the 4-step program. We're talking when you're talking about the fact that you're considering taking on debt to own a car. The first question is going to be, what is the right car for me? And then there's also, do I have a trade? What sort of add-ons do I want? And how am I going to pay for it? Well, I think we've pretty much covered the first step at least. Do I need a car? So we're going to cover the rest of it in our next episode. I feel like this is a pretty decent place to cut it off and say...
Yeah, sounds good. We're ready to wrap it up.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Katie, why don't you go ahead and give everybody your bullseye for the day?
Okay, my bullseye is definitely going to be, look at your situation, figure out the purpose of this car, and really think hard about who's driving it, what is it going to be for, and get that understanding. Yes, we all want the dream car Ferrari, but be real with yourself, be real with what you can afford, and think about that and what it's going to be serving as part of your family.
Yes. Okay. Bullseye. So my bullseye is going to be this. If there's one thing you take away from this episode, it is that what you need to consider about purchasing a car, it starts long before how am I going to pay for it. It starts with, what is this expense that we're talking about? If y'all have listened to us, you know that we are big budgeting fans. And part of your budget, regardless of what you do, unless you are just never leaving your house, part of your budget is always going to be transportation expense. So the only question, you're gonna have that expense. It's gonna be part of your budget. The only question is, how much is that expense gonna be? And this entire conversation that we've just had is part of answering that question. Is your transportation expense the Metro card in New York City, or is your transportation expense gonna be the monthly payment on a car, the upkeep of the car, fuel, insurance, and so forth? You need that's answer that question and put it in your budget. And then purchasing a car isn't, oh, I'm buying a depreciating asset. It is, this is part of my budget. This is my transportation expense. I got to work. I got to feed the family. This is how I'm going to get there. Bullseye.
Ooh, good one.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's the closing bell. You have made it to the end of yet another BullCast podcast. If you liked what you heard and you haven't subscribed already, then go to your favorite subscription service for podcasts and subscribe. If you'd like to find out more about me and Katie, you can find out a little bit about us on the BullCast website. That's bullcastpodcast.com. If you want to look us up on Twitter, we also have our Twitter handle. That's @BullCastPodcast. If you'd like to see some really, really fantastically flattering pictures of me, no, not really, you can look us up on Instagram. Our Instagram handle is @BullCastPodcast. And finally, Katie and I work for a wealth advisory firm. The name of that firm is Pickler Wealth Advisors. And if you'd like to find out a lot about Katie and me and our amazing team and our boss, you can look up that website at picklerwealthadvisors.com.
It's advisors with an O, not an E.
Yes, indeed it is every time. But I feel like I've given them enough to be going on with, Katie. So for now, I'm Cort.
I'm Katie. Great Scott.
Autobots, roll out.